That's gonna be the next wave of Grimm when Grimm and Nadia finally make some things happen, and we get little kids running around on the Interceptor, and that's going to be a whole branch
Bobby
of
and Grim got
Grimm's lore
busy.
that people are going to be like, I don't know if I like that or not, but I liked it because it was wholesome. But I love Grimm. He really needs to take care of those kids.
He's making all of this up. Just FYI. All of it up, whole
Oh
cloth.
no, I'm planting
I'm
these.
Hey,
not a fan of the no, I'm telling stories about the main character's kids. You
hey,
know,
Jeff, all of it's made up.
no, it's not. That's the real trick, right?
I
It's
know
not.
that might be a future subject, how to transition generations or something, because I
Don't. You
don't.
don't.
Right.
Troopers fall through an endless sky. Military science fiction contest.
In science fiction, there's always the possibility of anti-aging longevity
Well,
treatments.
they have
So,
that in Grimm. Yeah, they do.
no,
They have
they do.
they have it up to twice your normal lifespan.
Oh,
And
that's
so you
all.
basically you can reset your no, you can reset your genetic age.
Oh,
So, in fact, that's part of the in Grim Legacy. That's part of the storyline, is that Chief Suresh goes to have the process done so she can keep flying because she hit 40, and they're like, no, you can't fly anymore. You have to go to the academy to train or a desk job. And so she went and had the procedure done, and they screwed up and they reset this chief with 25 years of naval experience. She's the cob on the boats. They reset her age a little too young, and so it's kind of one of the storylines about Legacy.
I just
how young did they reset her age?
16, 18. I mean, that was so today we're
like a
talking
kid,
about
basically.
how to write good bad guys. And
Oh yeah, whoops.
actually in Peter Hamilton's book that I just read, the whole idea of life extension played into the motivation for the bad guys, which they don't think they're bad guys, of course, but that's a big part of what they do and what makes them kind of evil to us as the reader as we're reading their motivations. Okay, well, hey, welcome to the show. Um, I'm fighting a cold, so I might say some weird things. Everybody else will keep me in line. This is the Military Science Fiction Podcast. I have moved away from our intro, which I don't have it in front of me, but I'm going to get it back next time because I
For
do
four
think
guys who like military sci-fi
yeah,
with over 150
I
million
know
books between us, all of them Rick.
because I did want to call out. I want to recognize that Rick just finished his 78th novel, Archangel, which is coming from Athon soon, and that is an accomplishment. So,
Hopefully, that's a book you could talk about.
oh, can you talk about that book, Rick? I think you can. You've been talking about it.
Well, I mean, I can talk about it in general terms, sure.
Okay.
It's
All right. Do I need to strike what I just said?
no. It's
Okay.
it's top secret or anything. It's not like I signed an NDA about it.
I
Did
try
I,
not to
Did
censor
did I, Josh?
myself.
That's
I
right.
censor you
right.
guys all the time, but not me. No, I'm kidding. Okay.
So what are we up to? Okay, so Rick, you've written 79.
78.
78, excuse me. I've written much fewer, 14, 24, 27, 28, 29. And I've published 29 and I've written 33. I have 4 I have written that I haven't published that probably will never see the light of day because they're in the wrong genre, or I wrote them to be published and then it just didn't work out for whatever reason. They're still good books, but so yeah, 20 to 29 books for me. And then
think I've
Josh,
got
you're what,
like 14, 15, something like that.
and James, you're at
I'm adding it up right now. I'm at 14 and then 3 unpublished. So
we're at like
You need to publish
140 books between all of us.
yeah,
That's
You need
pretty
to publish
good.
those, James.
I didn't publish them.
You should.
Yeah, I know.
An unpublished book is an unrealized
An unrealized dream.
treasure trove.
Or conversely, the wrong published book hurts your career.
That is true.
You move on to the
That
next
is
thing.
true.
That depends on how many books you have published.
Yeah, well,
I know
guess
that's the thing. That's why you
probably
move on to the next
I
thing.
guess at your point, Rick, since you have 79 books and you're so established in military sci-fi, 78, and you're so established in military sci-fi, if you were to write 3 high fantasy novels and they bombed, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't affect your career at all. But it would make you feel better, wouldn't it?
It would. And if I didn't have so many commitments to so many books I have to write, I would do that.
You got to stop making those commitments.
I got to keep making my mortgage payments, Jeff.
I know.
Pay
That's
your house off, Rick.
You're locked into those monthly that paycheck thing.
Actually, the agricultural land behind me, the guy's going to sell it, and I may have to buy
You
it
buy it?
to keep from a developer buying it and putting up a house there, or a house or two. It's 55 acres, so maybe a house or four.
Well, it shouldn't
Yeah.
be that expensive then, right?
Land's pretty expensive around here now, so I might have to get a loan on that, and that's going to mean even more commitments and push that
Well,
fantasy
see, then
further
what you
off.
do is you sell part of that land to somebody you know who wants to build a house there.
No, that's happened before. People just sell it again to a developer. I'd have
Well, you
to
sell it to
rent-
somebody you know who won't resell
I'd
it.
have to lease it to a farmer so he would grow
Right,
crops
that's
on it.
maybe you can make lease money off it.
Yeah,
To get a tax break, you might have to do that.
yeah.
That just happened to, I have a hazelnut orchard across the street from me, and it just sold. Like the folks that owned it died, and we all thought it was going to turn into a development, and then somebody came in from Secret Squirrel and bought it. So thankfully it's going to be an orchard for a while longer.
We should do an episode about the rat race that we're all in.
We should do a GoFundMe for this property so I can
For Rich's property, so he doesn't have to.
I
Yeah.
don't think you're going to get a lot of sympathy on a GoFundMe being the most successful military sci-fi author working at the moment.
I don't
I think it's-
you can say that.
Josh, survey
David
says.
Weber. David Weber.
It's
Survey
really hard to
says-
compare because it's hard to compare traditional and
That's true.
indie hybrid sales because there's no way to really accurately look at like their Amazon numbers and hardback numbers, and there's not a whole lot. I would say that if you're not above, you're pretty damn close. That would be my professional opinion.
It's going to be weird in 20 years when we don't have this perception of, bookstore sales. But then Amazon's never going to share their sales numbers, but at least use the
Yeah, our
publisher.
sales. We know our sales numbers though.
In 20 years, I'll be a 78. That's going to be weird.
Oh, let's not talk about that.
Yeah.
All right, time is a bad guy. Let's
It
talk
really
about bad
is.
guys.
Nice transition.
So bad guys, writing bad guys
Let's
well
fugate.
is hard if you didn't know that. And writing bad guys in military science fiction might be a little additionally hard because every military and every government has objectives, right? Which is a thing that we've talked about. So
I'm
No,
going
and they all think they're the
with
good
you
guys.
right off the bat, so to the surprise of everyone. Writing bad guys is not hard.
say that again.
Writing bad guys is not hard
Okay.
because you're not really writing. Every bad guy isn't Hitler. You're writing somebody whose goals and motivations dynamically oppose your protagonist, and that's easy. What does the protagonist want? What does the antagonist want? They should collide, and then there's also the obstacles, right? So there are levels of bad guys. You've got your primary antagonist, which is whatever, and then you've got your obstacles. I'm trying to think of a good example of that.
Drill sergeants.
In Dune,
Mhm.
the Beast Raban was an obstacle. He wasn't an antagonist. The Baron Harkonnen, I refuse to say it the other way, was the
Harkonnen.
Harkonnen.
was the antagonist. Fade was an obstacle. So, you have, and obstacles don't necessarily have to be people. They can be events if you're doing a man versus nature story or, man versus self story. But antagonists are actually really easy to write, just like protagonists are actually really easy to
I'm
write.
sure I agree that Fade Rotha was an obstacle rather than an antagonist.
He didn't drive he wasn't the person who drove the opposite side of the story. He really had nothing to do with the opposite side of the story. He just happened to be, a good fighter that Harkonnen wanted to use to kill
And a
Paul.
sociopath.
I mean,
Yeah,
if
but
anything,
wasn't
I would
the
say
end-
they made
but
him.
he didn't cause the downfall of the House Atreides. He didn't,
Right.
he
But
wasn't.
when you talk about what makes a good antagonist, though, I think, Fade Rautha could have been like, if he, like, say you were going to write a redemption arc for him, like, because he was such a simplistic bad guy, there's no redemption arc, so you have no sympathy for him at all.
You were supposed to, though. You were supposed to.
Really?
Yeah, but I don't think Herbert.
But they
I don't
started
think
him by
Herbert wrote.
slitting that girl's throat, so that kind of made it so you couldn't have any sympathy for him.
Well, you talking about the movie or the
The
book?
movie.
Well, I mean, I'm in the book. That's one of Herbert's problems, at least in the first two books, because that's all I read. Is his bad guys were not human. They were not human at all.
I mean,
did
Conan was an animal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but they weren't somebody you could like.
They weren't Loki.
No, they weren't somebody you could halfway sympathize with and then realize, oh, he really is bad. No, he was always like a mustache twirling, bad guy who loved to monologue.
And let's be honest, there are bad guys like that, but you just can't have every bad guy like that. There are one of my favorite villains in fiction history is the operative in Serenity.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You're a monster. He's like, I'm a monster now. I'm not gonna live in this world. I know what I am. You know what I mean? Like that I love that guy. But
and yet he was able to have a redemption arc in the end.
Because he was a true believer who got his belief system, destroyed because he thought that they were trying to make the world, the place better, and then they unleashed the whatever on the society, and obviously that meant that they weren't
making a better world. All of them
Not for
better
me.
worlds.
Yeah. But I really liked him, and so those are two different kinds of antagonists. Josh, who was the antagonist in Valor?
Well, each book kind of had their own like limited protagonist. The first book actually was the main protagonist really didn't show up until the end.
Antagonist.
Yeah, that's what I meant. But for a lot of the first book, it was almost all the characters were antagonistic to everyone else because everybody was lying. But it was in terms of the series, it was a huge kind of galactic spanning conspiracy that I overwrote. And if I was going to do it again, I probably would I'd probably do it a little differently. Just in terms of scale. But I think what I like to look at in terms of bad guys or antagonists are the difference between, like Rick said a minute ago, the difference between antagonists or antagonistic forces and an actual bad guy.
Was Jeff, I think.
Oh, sorry. Because I don't like doing the mustache twirling bad guy, and I also don't want to do a Thanos type character where they're trying to destroy the universe. I want to have bad guys that are reasonable, if that makes sense. But I do like to have bad guys in the books, but I also like to have a number of antagonists that aren't directly related to the bad guy, and so they can have go ahead,
Jeff.
Were you gonna say something?
So yeah, I mean, and I used to do my bad guys like in Terra Nova, the first series I wrote with Richard Fox. Those bad guys were kind of like mustache twirling bad guys. And so we wrote them like that, kind of just larger than life, like evil for the sake of evil, like all of that. But anymore, I really like even the most recent book I put out, the Navarus Chronicles, which is a sci-fi take on Peter Pan. Captain Hook was really looking to heal himself after he lost his arm, and so he was doing a whole bunch of nasty kind of scientific experiments with all the stuff that they had there on the planet, trying to figure out how to regrow his arm, basically, because Penn cut it off. even though he was he was a bad guy, like he was killing people and doing all that kind of stuff. I tried to give him some kind of basis in reality, in terms of just that he didn't want to kill everybody just to kill everybody. You know what I mean?
Well, and sometimes people have that basic moral failing that they can't, that blind spot they can't see. Like, don't experiment on kids or whatever it is that they're
Right.
doing.
Yeah.
What's funny is like readers have become so sensitive to bad guys that if you have a bad guy who is, you know, I don't want to say mustache twirling, but like he's evil and he's doing evil things. They're like, oh, he's so unbelievable and one dimensional. And like I base a lot of my villains and heroes on real people and throughout history. And so in Against All Odds, there was this governor who of the Zuckerbar system, who was trying to create a condition in which he could declare independence for his system and take total control of it, as his family had for 500 years. And I got a lot of reviews that were like, "Oh, he was just such a two-dimensional villain," and I'm like, "No, he wasn't. He had complex ideas and moral themes, but you've been conditioned that if the villain isn't likable or redeemable or somehow sympathetic, then that means they're not a well-written villain." And I think people really, I look forward to the day people get away from that, because I'm so tired of writers and movies bending over backwards to make their villains sympathetic, almost to the point in some cases where they're more sympathetic than the hero, and the only reason they're the villain is because the narrative says they're the villain.
All right.
Well, that's been
Marvel.
around for a while. I mean, look at for instance, Jurassic Park: The Lost World. The hunters that went in there to capture the dinosaurs were working for the people who owned the dinosaurs on land owned by the people who owned the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs are not animals; they are genetic creations. Even what's his name, Sam Neill's character in the third movie says they're not really dinosaurs; they're just monsters we created. And yet somehow the good guys are the ones who go in there and sabotage them and get a bunch of them killed.
Yeah.
Vince Vaughn's character and what's her name, the photographer character, they were both murderers, and I was rooting for them to die.
And that poor hunter, I mean, like,
and they got their friend killed, who was the only decent one in the whole group.
Yeah. And then because of their actions, they got the T-Rex released on
San Diego,
and that whole crew of the ship were killed.
Yeah.
There was another movie.
They're only the good guys because they said they were the good guys, but they were the bad guys.
That used to be an abnormality, right? Nobody thought Hans Gruber was the good guy, right? Nobody thought Michael Irons in Die Hard 3 was the good guy. That used to be an abnormality. It used to be that the bad guys not actually being the bad guys and the good guys being the bad guys. That used to be really rare, and now it is. It's flipped. It's the most common thing. I mean, look at all the news articles. Speaking of Thanos, look at all the news articles about how like Thanos was right.
Right.
And I'm just like, if you're agreeing with Thanos, you got problems.
Thanos was not. I'm thinking about Hans Gruber and some of the other examples, and for me, what I enjoy about a good bad guy is competence. Like, I want to see a bad guy that has a plan, executes it.
That's characters in general, right?
Yeah. Maybe I don't agree with their reasons or their reason, but that's the thing. Like, that's the real challenge, is to make their reasons good enough to make sense, but fundamentally flawed in some way. Or, in MILSF, you're a soldier. You're doing what your government tells you to do. You might not actually be a bad guy, but you're executing what could be perceived as a bad mission. But then a character like Thanos.
In military science fiction, you can have antagonists that are on your side.
Well, that too. Like that, I think those are obstacles. Like what,
Well,
no, they could be straight up antagonists.
It might be that the enemy is the obstacle and the antagonist is the guy on your side.
Just depends on how you write it. Yeah. I know one of my favorite bad guys I've written was this captain who was in charge for the Caliph, who was in charge of an experimental ship, and it was supposed to be a close orbit missile destroyer, basically for saturation firing of close range. And him and Jacob went at it, and they were in orbit of a planet that was orbiting that was falling into a black hole. And if you left orbit of the planet without your engines engaged at a certain amount of velocity, you would be sucked into that black hole. And, you know, at the end of the battle, one of them has to surrender and trust the other one that he'll get his crew out of there. And the captain of the enemy ship was, you know, like, I went out of my way to show him as this is like, he's loyal to his crew, you know, he's loyal to his government. He's loyal to his own moral code. He's not murdering babies. You know, he doesn't condone slavery, but that's what his government does. So, you know, but he doesn't personally own any. You know, he's doing the best he can with what he has. And I really ended up liking the character. And I've done a couple of characters like that where it's like they, you know, the honorable, you know, in World War I, the pilots used to, you know, they used to fly over the downed enemy pilots and you know, salute, you know, and they had a rule against strafing them because it was dishonorable. It was considered dishonorable to do that. And so I always try to have like a range of villains, you know, the psychopaths, you know, and the mass murderers, but also the people who are just, you know, doing the best they can with what they've got. And
well, and the one thing, I think the one thing that Rick said about the competent bad
James.
guys.
That was Jeff again.
That was James.
Sorry,
Yeah.
my mind is
attribute everything
spacing
to
today.
Rick.
I apologize.
Need more coffee,
Rick
Josh?
said everything. I do need more coffee. I like
Keystroke
having
coffee. Do you have any keystroke coffee? Should we pitch that?
I don't have, we stopped selling it actually. I
Oh.
got it. Yeah. I got 6 pounds of Black Rifle coffee for Christmas. And
Oh, do you like that
I've
stuff?
been it's good when somebody buys it for me. I'm not gonna buy it myself. It's kind of pricey. But yeah, I do need more coffee. Anyway, I like having bad guys that are competent. But also I like pitting competent characters together. You know, if you get like a mustache twirling bad guy and he's doing something, and what he's doing is really simple, and the good guys can't figure it out, or they don't see it coming, or they've got to wrangle some stuff to fix it. I would rather have a really significant problem to solve and have the characters solve it, rather than just having some kind of simple evil plot, basically. And so, like, in terms of bad guys, I focus a lot on the empathetic nature, sympathizing with the bad guy, but also trying to figure out something that he can do that's unique and not just, I want to blow up the world, because I don't like those plots. And especially if you're writing a series, if book one is saving the world from nuclear destruction, how are you going to level that up in book two? And I found that over the last 2 years of really diving into the military thriller market and reading all those books, that feeds a lot of my mil sci-fi, in that you can have a small problem and make that small problem be important to the characters. And I think that character issue on both sides, the antagonist and protagonist, are a lot more interesting than just, say, solving the world. Like when you talk about like
Personal stakes are what
personal stakes matter, right?
Yeah.
Like when you talk about World War II or World War I, and you talk about the hundreds of thousands of lives that were lost during those wars,
Millions.
you know, that number doesn't that number doesn't mean anything to me. Like I don't feel anything about that. But when I think about, like, my grandfather was at Normandy, he survived. That is a personal stake, him, just that one person. And so instead
What's
of
the old
doing,
saying, Josh? One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Is a statistic,
100%, 100%. And so if you can come up with a bad guy that has reasonable goals, that isn't destroying the world, like, you know, terrorist action, they're going to blow up a building or something, right? Like, that's still not earth shattering. That's
But it
still,
doesn't have to be, though.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. It just has to be important to the characters. I do see a lot of. I was actually talking to another author the other day, about a story, and he's like, well, there has to be these massive fleet battles, and I'm like, well, why? He's like, well, because that's how you raise the stakes. And I'm like, oh, but that doesn't matter to the people on the ground who are your main characters. What does that have to do
Right.
with anything? The stakes
Right.
are important only in so much that they affect the main characters, and just making them bigger doesn't make them more important.
I mean, was he working off a reader expectation kind of thing, or
No, he just, you know, just you know, thought he knew how to do
uh,
it, because everybody always tells you, right? Like, raise the stakes, raise the stakes, raise the stakes. Just like open with action, they're just repeating something that they were told. They don't actually know what it means. Raising the stakes does not mean, okay, well, the world's in danger. And I always tell people, like, well, you need better stakes than that. Like, well, the universe is in danger. I'm like, no, nobody cares about the universe, and nobody cares about the world. They care about,
their mother or their kids, or
yeah.
One of the most diabolical villains that I've written, I believe anyway, was a man named Andre Damiani, who was the villain for a bunch of the earlier Birthright universe books. And he was the head of basically this monopolistic corporate monolith that kind of ran things behind the scenes. And his goals were basically, for most of it, just to keep things the way they were. He wasn't trying to destroy the world or kill millions of people or do anything to change stuff and make himself, enslave people. He just wanted things the way they were because it suited him. But the problem was people were going to change the way things were because the war was over and they wanted to change things so that, like, this corporate monopoly wasn't a monopoly anymore. So he was, by his point of view, forced to do some things that were bad, but not necessarily apocalyptically bad, just to retain control of the government. So it was really hard in the end of, say, the first Birthright book, for the main character to get, I don't know, patriotic or holier than thou or whatever, to stop him, because he just fought a war basically for the status quo that they'd had. And now this guy's like, I just want to keep the status quo.
I mean,
and
one of the most difficult things about the age we live in is that we live in a time of evil bureaucracy that maintains the status quo.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
And if in Birthright, if Damiani hadn't been about to kill this government operatives who were the main character's friends, and justifiably so from a moral point of view, because they had been trying to kill him and, thwart his plans. Not that, not his plans were good, but there wasn't any real good guy in between the government and that monopoly. But the main character really just wanted to have things go back to the way they were on his home. And if the main bad guy hadn't said, well, I'm going to execute these people right now, then he might not have opposed him. But since he did, he had to, which
he demonstrated a moral failure there, which you're right.
Yeah.
If he hadn't, that's a direct threat, a direct expression of evil, I guess. And so that gives you something to respond to. But if he's just a bureaucrat stamping things,
yeah, well, basically that's what he was saying. It's what he was trying to convince the guy with. It's like, I'm not doing anything different than we've been doing for 100 years. I just want to, everything's working fine. I'm just going to keep it that way.
right?
But I think that it's funny because this is a writing thing, not as much as a military science fiction thing, but I think it's a lot easier for me to write good bad guys when I write third person. Because when you write first person, the main good guy just doesn't encounter the main bad guy that many times in any good story. So you're seeing him through his henchmen, through his operatives, through, whatever machinations that he's set in motion. Because unless it's somebody like, I don't know, Loki, who's superhuman, like a god who can actually go to the front line and fight, the guy pulling the strings isn't going to be the one out there actually shooting at you. So you if you're in a first person military science fiction book, you're going to be shooting at what Jeff calls the obstacles until you get to the end, and when you might be shooting the bad guy, the real antagonist.
Well, what's funny is that I was just thinking about like the different antagonists, and I try to use historical figures, historical events, to drive my fiction. And I was actually just watching a whole documentary about why the Middle East has such a hard time maintaining an advanced army, because they don't have a sergeant corps, and they don't trust anybody. Like there was this guy who they sold Saudi Arabia a whole bunch of Bradleys, just a whole bunch of Bradleys, and the army officer went there to train everybody on them, and he handed out manuals to all the crews, the Bradley crews. And the next day he comes back to start the training, and all the manuals are gone, because the officer in charge of the unit came and collected all the manuals because he didn't want anybody to know how to use the equipment.
Right. I mean, we experienced that firsthand.
I train with Saudi Arabian officers,
Yeah.
and most of them are from the royal family. And being an officer in the Saudi Arabian military is kind of handed out as a favor to junior members of the royal family. So they are not only don't trust the commoners who would be your NCO corps, they also have a real bad sense of entitlement.
And there was more to it too. There was a lot more too, like talked about how like there is a huge history of coups in the Middle East, and so nobody ever, no king or leader wants their military to be too powerful or to have too much knowledge or be too popular. And I was like, man, that's just a crappy way to try to have a military where you're.
Well, it's fine if you're only fighting other people who have the same system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, and there's a fear that if your people know more than you do, they'll kill you and take your job.
Yeah. Pick your stuff. Yeah. Then it all comes down, so it's like there's a lot of beyond just personal motivations. There's cultural motivations. There's historical motivations. Rick, you've written that Alien Species. We had that Express Elevator to Hell. We had the aliens. Well, okay. In my book, in my short story, they were aliens. In your guys', they were genetically engineered lab creatures. But
spoilers.
Huh? What'd you say?
I said spoilers.
Oh yeah. Well,
That's
sorry.
okay.
It's been out for a month. You haven't read it. It's your fault. And even those things have motivations, simplistic motivations, but motivations all the same. And so it is to me, it's pretty obvious when someone's motivation is simply whatever the protagonist wants, I want to destroy, versus I have my own arc that I'm trying to get to, and the antagonist has his arc, or protagonist has his arc, and they collide, and that's the better way, in my opinion, to do it for the most part.
Like, in the hard part for me with bad guys is if you write a really, really well-written bad guy, temptation is there to give him a redemption arc. So then you need another bad guy to replace him. If he, like in Wholesale Slaughter, this series, Aaron Starcad, who's the head of the Starcad supremacy, like this big antagonistic empire that's opposed to the main good guy's government. He starts out as arrogant, like an arrogant prick, who's just orders everybody around and thinks he's, his poop doesn't stink. But then I had to write this competent military intelligence character because he had to have like an obstacle in the way that was, trying to kill the main characters. But she was competent, and she was also not immoral. She was a patriot, and she did what she did because she believed in her government. And it got down to the fact that somebody like this who's competent and patriotic isn't going to be loyal to some arrogant moron who's making all the wrong decisions. So it became necessary to the story to make Aaron Starcad somebody who's not actually an arrogant moron, but pretends he is because he doesn't want his enemies to basically target him. So he acts like he's not a threat, but he's secretly very competent, although he is arrogant, but he's not a moron, and everything he does has a reason, even though he's kind of his own Bruce Wayne to his own Batman. He's acting like a fool in public, so he won't be a threat to the rest of the
That's pretty cool. I like that.
nobility. So in the end, I had to make him more of a friendly enemy, and he actually saves the day in the end of the last novel. So I mean that's a big temptation for me when I write a really good bad guy. I want him to have a good end. So
Right.
I did that with something like that with one of my bad guys. I really like. I wrote one of the obstacles in the first book was this mole and secret agent, and I ended up really liking her, so I didn't kill her at the end, and then I brought her back for book 4, and it was one of my more popular books because it had this big military thriller spy subplot that was pretty awesome. And she ended up working for the Side of Angels for a little while.
I think
You
that's
know,
a trope though that people do enjoy. Like I don't like it when it's obvious that we've created this fight that's not going to go anywhere, and the bad guy is going to become a, you know, helping with the story or whatever. Like you see that a whole lot in comic book movies. Um, but I do really enjoy it when you get to spend time with a person that, you know, is competent, has their reasons, and then comes around to the main character's way of thinking, which sort of reinforces why the good guy is the good guy. What are some things that you think are unique to bad guys in MILSF? Like maybe mercenaries that aren't completely, profit driven, or honor roll officers, or what are some things that you think might be unique here?
Um, some of the things that you can do with Mill Sci-Fi, I mean, you could do with everything. But I like the idea. You have the ability to do, for instance, aliens, and their motivations don't have to be anything human related or human centric. They can be something completely kind of off the wall.
Mhm.
I think you still have to make it reasonable. Um, it's I think about Independence Day, and they're coming to the planet to, do whatever they need to do, and they killed their planet, and now they're coming and taking over. Like that's not. I don't find that as reasonable, especially if they're a galactic spanning civilization that can travel intergalactically. You could probably do something other than destroy like a planet.
Or if they could, we wouldn't have a chance in hell stopping
Right.
them.
Right.
For sure, right. But you can still give them kind of reasonable goals or motivations, but also doing the like Jeff's done with the different warring navies. You're going to have personal motivations and goals that are kind of ingrained in them from their society and from where they grew up and where they lived. And I think that kind of transverses all of fiction. Where they came from kind of sets up what they're trying to do and why they're doing it.
Get more
But
opportunities
I
for that
think,
military sci-fi, just because, like, if you're assuming you have multiple planets in your sci-fi system, you've got a situation where it's not just, oh, this is a French guy and this is a British guy, this is a Russian guy. I mean, this is a person
right.
from 900 light years away, separated by 1,000 years from Earth.
Well, and like what I'm doing with Weaponized, kind of the background of the trilogy is a kind of a war that's brewing along I don't want to call it a neutral zone, but it's along a span of space where there's settlements and planets or whatever, and the antagonistic force um, is kind of built on the same principles as North Korea, in terms of like how they function, and the guy that took over the dictator there, um, in his view, their nation state has been kind of backhanded and tricked and cheated and all of this, and so he's kind of ruling everything with an iron fist, and he's taking back what he believes is his rightful stuff. And so he's not just going out kind of just because he wants to take over something just to take over something. He feels like their nation has been cheated for several decades, and now he's like going kind of on a crusade to take everything back. Now he's wrong, right? Like that's just his personal interpretation of things, but you can do that with a lot of things where you kind of put it in their personal aspect or personal viewpoint.
Mhm.
But that's, like I said, that's kind of in the background. That
Which is another weird thing that happens too, because it's like Rick just dealt with this with Dave, with that one dude.
Huh.
Like just because your bad guy believes something or does something, or something horrible happens to somebody in your book, like I am not espousing global genocide from orbital bombardment, saturation bombardment, like happens sometimes in the books. Those are the bad guys' views, you know. And I know I get reviews where it's like, oh, he's a misogynist because there aren't many women in his books, and then I get other reviews that are like, oh, Jeff's
Okay, I
such a
balance you
pro-power
out, Jeff.
author.
I balance you out because apparently I'm an SJW hyper feminist because I have competent females in my books.
I mean,
I-
Rick
well, I
is
think
both
that's
a terrible
interesting. Like a
conservative
lot
and a
of people go
hyper-liberal.
like, I've seen a lot of attacks on people that I know, like you guys in particular, and other mill sci-fi authors, where they're identifying the author as, well, he wrote this horrible bad guy, so he must be this. And I'm like, if you're going to say that about, for instance, if they say that about Rick, you have to say that about every single author that does that
Lucas wrote
writes,
Darth Vader doesn't mean
because
he wants to choke people out. I mean,
right, every single author writes things that they don't necessarily believe. You know, even in fiction where you're saying, well, the author's just preaching about this specific subject or whatever. If he is, that means he's writing a character that goes against that. So are you saying that he believes both? Like, you can't.
Well,
I
this
think
is,
that's kind of
I mean, the
silly.
author critique, you know, somebody was going way back to the time I got to take an actual whatever critique of literature class. That used to be a thing that you would afford an author, right? That they could write something they didn't believe. But
Right.
I actually think it goes to, this is probably another subject, but there is so much content today that people are not willing to let authors write multiple things. Like, you are the thing that you published, and we're not going to let you. And which, getting back to, I think we were talking about this, but why certain you know thing like certain authors are not willing to write bad guys. Like, they'll write against moral codes or ideas about justice or things of that nature, but won't write a bad guy because potentially they don't want to be associated with that or seen that as like an extension of them. Like, you're
I
not
mean, if
capable
you,
of.
God forbid, you write a scene or a chapter from the point of view of the bad guy,
Yeah.
then it's like,
Right.
yeah, you espouse this, you espouse,
I mean, I do
genocide or whatever.
anyways, and you know, the hell with them. But I mean,
Yeah.
like I want, you know, I want my readers to know that, like, if you read my book and you come away thinking that Jeff believes in harems or Jeff believes in slavery or Jeff believes in, you're wrong. I mean, you know, you don't know what I believe in because
Hey, what's wrong with harems, Jeff?
A lot of
barely
drama.
handle one
I don't
woman.
need
Make a
that
lot of
drama,
money
man.
on harems, you know that, right?
Well, it's like
Um,
trying to set up the background for this thing that's happening in Weaponized. I did hours and hours and hours of research on North Korea and hours of research on the Kim family, and
oh my
not
gosh,
that,
yeah,
yeah,
that was
not
fun.
that
I
I
imagine.
wanted to do like a direct uh like one for one copy, but I wanted to see like what is the feeling about Kim in
You wanted
Korea.
to be
So I
heavily
watched,
inspired by, but not a analogous.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I watched a lot of like pro Kim videos. I watched a lot of pro North Korean videos, and did a lot of research on in that
Are you
aspect.
defecting to
And
North Korea now?
right, exactly. Like when these characters or this background shows up in the book, and I don't know if we're ever gonna get a POV from that side, but if I ever write this side of it, and I, you know, like project him as this like savior of the nation and he's such a great guy and he's, they call him a god in North Korea and all of this. If I do that in my books, that doesn't necessarily mean I believe those things, but I've got to be able to write it accurately. And if I write from the POV of someone who is a uh, uh, a citizen of this and they believe that their leader is doing the right thing, but I fill it with a whole bunch of like this isn't the right thing, but I got to like that's not realistic, right? Like
Yeah.
if
Well,
you're
that's
going to
like
write a true believer, you have to write a true believer, and that means you have to get that feeling right. But that doesn't mean that you believe what your true believer believes. You're just
Josh.
presenting a really well.
That's what I've seen a lot recently in people who are writing historical novels. They have people in spots in history where it wouldn't make sense for them to think, oh, this is oppressive or this is misogynist or this is whatever. And yet they are, because they're worried about the readers thinking, oh, if I don't write this, then they're going to believe I believe this. But it's a historical fiction with a character from back then. I mean, some woman in the 14th century is not going to think I'm being oppressed, because this is all any of them have known for centuries, and they don't have the internet. They don't know if any other women in the world are being treated differently than they are.
I had the blessing of having just a fantastic history teacher named Reggie Jane, who's also a fan now, which is kind of cool. And he said that the worst mistake you could make about learning history was to look at it through the lens of today.
Right.
You have to look at it as it is. You can't try to, and then Jordan Peterson gave that great talk about it in his classroom, where he's like, all of you want to think that you wouldn't be the Nazis, but every one of you would be. If you're from Germany, it's 1941, you're a Nazi. You all think you'd be Schindler, but in reality is you'd all be.
I mean, I hope it helps us appreciate Schindler, because trying to be Schindler is hard. Even Schindler had a hard time being Schindler.
The interesting thing about like the identifying the author as the bad guy, like you guys were saying, like think about a show like Dexter. You guys remember that show, the serial killer show on?
It just ended like a year ago, man. What do you remember?
Well, the actual show, because I knew they did a spinoff,
There's like
but I thought the actual.
I don't know.
Like the actual show I watched a couple of years ago.
The Dexter show, like you're following a serial killer, and everybody that watches the show, the fans of the show, are all rooting for Dexter. Like they're all like, yes, Dexter has to win, and he's kind of like an anti-hero kind of thing. But if you're gonna say like, oh, Rick's a misogynist, then the writer of Dexter has to be
he's a serial killer.
Got to be a serial killer, right?
Or
and what does that say about
Taylor
the
Sheridan
audience?
writing
for sure.
Yellowstone. Obviously, he's some sort of undercover mafioso cowboy.
100%. Yeah.
Mafia cowboys.
I think that's interesting that readers in general, like readers like in our area, not all of them, but some of them tend to label the authors as these things. When you're like, how many different things have you watched that you liked that are dealing with bad people? Game of Thrones was the biggest show of
the Sopranos
world. The Sopranos was amazing. Like all of those guys did horrible things, and you're rooting for Tony Soprano as he's beating the crap out of some dude or whatever. And I think it's just funny when
I've always rooted for Frank Castle to be on any of those shows.
I mean, they're reading for entertainment. They're not reading it from a historical perspective. And they also, you think about the charisma of characters like Dexter and the way that they make them relatable.
Actors really have an advantage over the written word, because the actor can take something that's written like kind of mediocre and really turn it into something special.
What I think is interesting is the like if you're writing like either near future or present day. I can't remember. I don't know if this was an actual review or not, but I remember seeing it a couple of years ago where they were talking about a book that was written. I think it was written in like 2018 or 2019, but it was set in 2020. And one of the reviews was, I can't believe they didn't say anything about the pandemic in this book. Like it never happened. And I'm like, first of all, it's fiction. Second of all, they wrote it before the pandemic started. Like they had some kind of crystal ball and could Like you're gonna go back to the future and go, I can't believe they wrote this. They don't have flying hoverboards. Like,
It's a whole other subject that people don't pay attention.
My
So,
Well, that's
editor
like
and I went around and around on one of my Arsenal books because they were in the airport and they were in the what's it called when you're right outside the plane, the gate. They were at the gate, but they hadn't gone. They didn't have to go through security to get there. And he's like, you can't, you're not allowed back there without a ticket and blah blah blah. And I'm like, yeah, but 9/11 didn't happen in this world. It's alternate. It's my superhero stuff is alternate history. It diverges in 1903. So there's things that happen that are the same, and there's things that don't happen. And one of the things that didn't happen was 9/11. And we kind of went round and round on that because he was just like he couldn't see the world that didn't have those security measures, in the airports.
right.
And that's kind of like that guy with the whole 2020 being like, "Where's the pandemic?" Even though the book hadn't even been written then.
Right. Well, it's interesting that one of Abercrombie's criticisms on I want to say it was Age of Madness. I think it was A Little Hatred. There's a sequence in that book where the town just goes nuts and people are rioting and people are getting killed and burned at the stake and all of this. And he wrote it before like all of the stuff happened with like the riots in the US and the UK and Jan
That's never
6 and
happened
all of
before.
that. He
Yeah.
wrote it before all of that, but it came out, I think, after, right? And so everybody was like, "Oh, look, he's saying this about Trump, or he's saying this about the UK, or he's saying this about the rioters, or whatever." And he's like, "That's not at all what happened. I wrote it years before any of that stuff happened."
I had
Because
this. I had the same thing happen a lot with the Earth at War series, because we were getting involved in interstellar war, and there was huge demonstrations and riots, which there would be if everybody suddenly found out there were aliens, and then the next thing you found out is the government is getting us involved in interstellar war. Of course,
Right.
there's going to be demonstrations and riots all over the world, and somehow some people either took this as a commentary on January 6th or a commentary on the George Floyd things, and just like, no, it's what would happen if
right.
everybody in the world just found out they're aliens, and now they find out we're fighting them in space.
I think
Yeah.
the theme of this conversation that I'm seeing as we're talking is that you've got to write good setup either for the good guys or the bad guys. But since we're talking about bad guys here, you really have to do your work in terms of setting up a realistic, reasonable antagonist.
Thanks for dragging this
making-
back on topic, by the way.
right.
Yeah, no, but the whole thing is it's all connected, right? Because if you're doing your job as a writer and you're creating a good bad guy, you have to understand the bad thing. You have to get inside their motivations in the head. And the easiest way to do that is do your research on real world bad people, and like really figure out like why are they doing it instead of just what are they doing, why are they doing it. If you're writing modern day thrillers and you're writing it from a terrorist point of view, you have to understand why they're doing it. And it doesn't mean that you agree, but you have to understand because you're going to have to present that in the book so that they're just not bombing something just for the sake of bombing. Why are they doing it? And you can extrapolate that in MILSFPOD to go with any antagonistic force, and you can look at why did Hitler do what he did, why did Mussolini do what he did, why did Stalin do what they did, and then pull
Those aren't
bits and
great
pieces
examples
of that.
though, because they were all power mad. I want
Yes, but they all had their own intrinsic motivations for why they, regardless of what they did, like horrible things. Hitler had his own motivations that he believed. So whether or not they were reasonable to you or I, he had his own motivations for why he wanted to do what he was doing. And so understanding those and extrapolating those in your writing is important.
There's a podcast called The Casual Criminalist that I listen to. And when they get into like the real psychopaths, the serial killers who killed like 70 kids or whatever, they talk about what these people said in their writings, before they were executed or before they went to jail or whatever. And it's interesting that, even these serial killers who are killing children, Like there's a famous one down in South America, killed like probably 200 kids in his life.
Wow.
And they, even those people somehow managed to justify this in their head somehow.
The
Like,
killer, you mean?
yeah, the killer.
Yeah.
Even they managed to say like, well, these kids were all in a really horrible situation, and I was abused most of my life, and I just wanted to keep them from having to go through the abuse that I went through. That's why I killed them.
Well, one of
They
the
justify this in their head.
if you look at
Right.
the origins of the Holocaust, actually go back to a case where there was a disabled boy that the family, basically the family was having, there was a lot of strain on the family to take care of the kid, and through like a bureaucratic sort of hand wave, Hitler approved the euthanization of this kid, and that led to euthanization of other people who were disabled, and then that became the bureaucratic law basis of law for why the Holocaust, like why it was justified to do these things in German law. Like, and so that people have, that's the thing. It goes back to how people have their reasons. And I mean, Stalin is the one,
Well,
if we're, and that's a whole other subject, but how like the Soviet government ran is just a complete nightmare of just killing people right and left.
one of the things that I tried to, that I wanted to do with Valor that I didn't get a chance to because I overwrote myself, um, was that the original bad guy, known as Cardinal, and that became like the kind of code word for everything that happened. But the original idea that I had was this Cardinal character, uh, was his goal was to take down the I can't remember what I called the nation, the good guy nation, but his goal was to take them down. It was to completely just dismantle them, and his reason was that the nation's military had gone in some peacekeeping aspect on this colony and had killed a lot of people. There was some civilian casualties, and his family was part of those civilian casualties, and so he hated the nation for what they had done. And his whole thing was, they say they're going to help, but then they just come and blow up everything. And I don't want that anymore. And so I was going to have a scene from his perspective as a child, watching this happen. And then it never came to, I couldn't use it. It became something other than that. But, even something as simple as that, where you lose a family member or something, and that drives your motivation, that's reasonable, regardless of how you act out and how that becomes. So it doesn't have to be, like we're saying, it doesn't have to be some big thing, or it doesn't have to be that they're insane. It could just be that their interpretation of events, and this is their answer. It's like Thanos wiping out half the galaxy to save itself. Like, it seems kind of crazy.
It's too big.
But
Yeah.
in his mind, it wasn't. So.
The last
Funny is the with Thanos, like the his motivation in the comic books was even weirder, because he was trying to
Right.
impress Lady Death.
Right.
So the last thing I wanted to bring up, bringing it back to specifically MILSF, is antagonists can be a great opportunity to explore other weapon systems and tactics, especially if you're looking at aliens, if you're looking at other countries that have their own, their own whole ecosystem of how they develop weapons and things of that nature. So that can be kind of fun to do, especially if you want to pit two types of weapons against each other. And so bringing it back to like, the real nerdery sometimes in MILSF, when you're looking at tactics and deployment and order of battle and things like that, you can really play with that in MILSF, which you can't do in other genres. So
Yeah, there's you can do. I mean, even in the real world, you can see like there's a difference in mindset between Western militaries and Soviet military back in Cold War. The Western military was on sophistication, precision, a lot of technology, whereas the Soviet military was based on the idea of, we want weapons you can give to a poorly trained peasant in this, country where everybody's a farmer, and they won't break it.
and
It
they
doesn't
also
matter if they hit what they're aiming at most of the time or not, as long as it doesn't break.
They don't have
Well,
anything else
also,
to
I mean,
train.
like, and they had a population surplus that they have no value of. So, and I recently found out it wasn't just Leningrad where they were not one step back. There were other assaults where they did that, where it was they did it in Finland, where when they were trying to kill the White Death and take that section of Finland, they basically got something like 10,000 Russian troops, put them in front of tanks and said march.
Right.
And they have like we in the West think human life has intrinsic value for the most part, but that's not necessarily universal truth with all cultures.
China and North Korea done the same thing.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, it's an exciting place to finish things up.
Those conversations get me right. I love that kind of stuff, man. We need to
Yeah,
have more
yeah.
of
I
those.
mean,
Yeah.
human nature is. I guess that's the thing. Like an antagonist gives you an opportunity to really explore a lot of different parts of human nature, and war brings that into relief, right? Or
Next time
conflict.
we need to do writing good guys.
I know.
Oh yeah, I love
Or
that.
bad good guys.
Bad good guys. There you go. What makes a bad good guy?
Oh, well, that's every book.
Yeah.
True.
Do you like deeply flawed heroes? Like how many blurbs start with that phrase? And I'm like, no,
Right.
no, I don't like deeply flawed heroes, because really what you're saying is I don't know how to write a hero, so I'm just going to write a villain and call him the hero.
Yeah, they've got their place, but
I'm gonna work out all my issues on the page here for you, so you can enjoy them with me. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out with us, and we will see you next time. We have a Facebook group now, so there'll be a link to the Facebook group as well as the Discord. I
See if you
apologize.
can't get that link to that podcast that Rick was talking
Yeah.
about.
Yep, I will find that and add it to the notes.
Also, please, we have a huge disparity between the number of likes we get and the number of views we get. So let's get some likes. Let's get some subscriptions going. All right, like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe.
Share.
Mash that
Agreed.
subscribe.
Don't stop.
button.
You know, was a cook who started that?
Really?
Really?
Yeah, YouTube chef started that entire thing. She started doing that with her YouTube channel, and it exploded. And every single YouTuber copied it. Every single
I know.
one.
You know, and I don't want to be like every YouTube channel, but unfortunately, you got to play their game a little bit. So
Just hit the button. Don't smash it. Don't break
Well,
your
Matt, just
computer.
click it.
If
Just
we were
click
like every YouTube channel, eventually we'd have to do a Patreon, and you'd have to
I
get
know.
exclusive content there.
When we go to cons, we're gonna start pranking.
Wow, wow. Oh wait, no, not that kind of content.
Oh yeah, we're
Yeah.
gonna prank people.
That's the wrong channel.
Josh will show you all his tattoos.
That's right.
All right. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all next time. Later.
Reaction to the system on fire. Military science, science fiction contest. Short stories every Wednesday. Military science fiction contest.